So our next speaker is somebody I am also really excited about. Her name is Talia Buford. Talia reports on issues of environmental justice, essentially. She did some really great work at the Center for Public Integrity when she was there about how different residents in different communities were being impacted by issues surrounding environmental justice. So she's going to talk about that a little bit today, about her reporting process. She was a reporter up until maybe like a few months ago at the Center for Public Integrity. We worked there together a month ago. And now she lives in New York, in Brooklyn. She's my neighbor, and she works at ProPublica, kind of doing the same thing. So she's a real big expert on this kind of stuff, a really awesome public thinker about it, and she's been following this stuff for a long time. Yeah, Talia Buford, y'all.
Thank you, John. So first, I'm excited that all of you guys are here and you're interested in social justice reporting. Hopefully this does not autoplay because I didn't test that before today. But as John mentioned, I'm a reporter at ProPublica, and before that, just literally last month, I was a reporter at the Center for Public Integrity, where I did a lot of stuff on environmental justice and also labor issues toward the end of my time there. And so at ProPublica, what I do is I cover the disparities in environmental impacts. And so instead of covering the death of a stream, I'm covering the death of a community, or the way that environmental impacts actually impact people. So that's what I'm doing. And so what I want to talk about today is character and community in social justice reporting, because that's what's going to help to make your story resonate, not only with your readers, but with people who can actually make some sort of a change. And when I talk about character, I'm not only talking about the character that will be the narrative, thread through your Pulitzer Prize winning, opus, but also your own character, because a lot of what happens in social justice community reporting is, it's really dependent on how you interact with the community and kind of how you comport yourself, essentially, and really telling their stories with dignity. So, really quickly, Nicole Hannah-Jones is a reporter at the New York Times Magazine. She's formerly a reporter at ProPublica, and she said this actually in the long-form podcast, which is a great podcast about, just writing generally, and her work, she's done a lot of stuff on segregation. She said that her goal is to make people uncomfortable with something we have always been comfortable with. And this is why we do what we do. This is the stuff that we are reporting on. We're talking about food injustice. We're talking about environmental impacts. We're talking about criminal justice. We're talking about things that we have kind of written off as that's just how that's the way that things are. And we're saying, you know what, it doesn't have to be that way. And it probably shouldn't, actually, if we're thinking about the ideals of America and what we should be doing with our lives. It's interesting because there was a question about, kind of advocacy and, journalism. And this is kind of the way that journalists can be, not advocates, but you can be it's like our silent form of protest. It's like, this is where you can be active. You can say, you know what, I can see this problem, and let's call some attention to it. Maybe someone can help fix it, because that's really what we end up doing. First things first, before you get to character, before you get to your community, you need to know what your story is. I like to do it just like, okay, in a word, what is my story that I'm trying to tell? And then use that as the guide to figure out what the people are that I need to tell that story. So, as John mentioned, at the Center for Public Integrity, we did a series called Environmental Justice Denied. And what that did is that looked at the Environmental Protection Agency's enforcement of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is basically the law that makes sure that we don't have state-sponsored racism and discrimination. So if you get any money or support from the federal government or from the federal government, then you are subject to making sure that you don't discriminate on the basis of race and gender and religion, all those things, those protected classes that we hear about. To enforce that, every federal agency, not just the EPA, but every federal agency has an office that ensures that they're basically policing and making sure that no one is being discriminatory. The EPA hadn't really been doing their job. So what we did, we reviewed 265 civil rights complaints, because you can actually literally petition the agency to say, hey, I think there's some discrimination happening in my community, can you come look into it? So we looked at the complaints that EPA received over several years, and a majority of those cases were rejected outright. 52 of them were dismissed, and they had only issued one preliminary finding in the history of the program at the time that we did this story, which was in 2015. They also had accepted 13 cases that remain open, there's like a handful that are still open at this point, but some of them have been just sitting languishing for like 10, 15 years. So for us, when I talk about knowing our story, for us, the word that we kind of coalesced around was inaction. We had all this data from EPA and these communities, and the first thing we did is we had to figure out what story the data told us. And so this is the story that we found. We saw that people were not getting their cases heard. They were sitting and just languishing, and we said, okay, how can we get at figuring out who we need to tell these stories? We need to figure out the different boxes, essentially, that we need to check. So what we did is we found, we said, okay, let's kind of just parse this by state, by agency, by discrimination type. And then we said, okay, we want to not only focus on the South, because that's where you kind of assume a lot of these things would happen. No offense to anybody who's from the South, but you just kind of, civil rights, you assume things like that. We want places, all around the country. We want different types of discrimination that's being alleged, whether it be, not different types of discrimination, but also different types of facilities that we're talking about, or different types of environmental harm. So we don't want all of our stories to be about a power plant that's being built, or something else. We want to just kind of get the full flavor of what the cases are that we saw. We also wanted to get different cases in different phases of adjudication. So we got one case that had been accepted and was languishing, and we got another case that had been found. And so this is actually what we ended up doing, like a ton of stories, but you can scroll through here if you want. And but this was the main story, and what we did is we broke it down. And we did, all of our data. We also ended up doing an interactive and all that other good stuff. But we went in and we actually told different stories. So we went to Selma. We went to actually, this is Uniontown, Alabama, not Selma. It was around the Selma anniversary, so we were trying to pick up on that. We went to Syracuse, New York. We went to California. We went to New Mexico. And we said, okay, this is not just a local story that is only happening in, the southeastern, United States. This is really happening everywhere. And we looked at that. So, okay. All right, so we figured out who we need to tell it. Where do you find the people? Not in couches, like that's number one. So there's good news. Well, there's good news and there's bad news. So first, the good news. People are literally everywhere, like literally. You can find them in lawsuits, you can find them in government documents, you can find them in data, whether it be stuff that's already created or something that you create yourselves like we did. So what we did with our data is we got all those complaints, which were scanned PDFs, by the way, that I had to enter by hand. We got all those, but we had names of organizations. We had ideas of people that we could pull from to say, okay, Rosemere Community Organization, what are you doing? And are you guys still there? Does anybody remember this case? Like, can we talk to them? So that was like a built-in set for us to kind of start to mine. Use neighborhood organizations, affinity groups, social media, obviously, and I think there's gonna be some sessions later on today about, kind of engagement and, getting all that stuff together. one of my favorite things is, just word of mouth. Like when you're talking to your sources, say, hey, do you know anybody that has, dealt with this issue or filed complaints? I got so many, and a lot of the people ended up pointing to the same people. And I was like, oh, okay, so I should talk to Brent. I should talk to this guy. And then also just in real life, depending on your story, like the food desert story, obviously you just go to the community. Like some of this stuff I'm thinking about sources for longer term stories where maybe you're in, some coastal city and you maybe are reporting in the heartland. But, if you are reporting on your own community, then you should just go out there and just talk to people, knock on doors, stand in front of Walmart, don't get arrested, but, just go out there and be a part of the community and find people that way. So once you actually figure out the people, you work the phones, you do all the things. And so for us, what we did, we got this list of cases that potentially fit the criteria that we were looking for. And we literally just worked the phones. We were based in DC, and we were literally trying to do something nationally. So we tried to figure out, okay, who can we actually find? Because some of these cases were so old, had people move away. Some of them were about schools, people graduate. What can we find? What case did people actually remember? Did something happen there? And were they willing to talk to us? So kind of just all those different things. We did a lot of preliminary interviews and just tried to vet the story as fully as we could before we made any trips. One thing that I wrote to myself to note to you guys is to trust your inner audience. Because as you're doing these conversations, as you find these people, if you're not interested in hearing the rest of their story, chances are your audience isn't going to be interested in hearing their story. So maybe they're not the person you should focus on. Like just because they're someone who checks boxes, but if you're just like, I don't really want to hear you talk, then maybe they're not the person for you. So, the perfect character, I kind of just mentioned this. The perfect character should illustrate the story that you're telling. Their story should make you feel something, whether it is heartbreak or outrage or, sympathy, something. Just feel something. You should not be indifferent. They gotta have receipts, ideally. Not actual story receipts, but, documents. So they have documented what their injustice is. They have correspondence from somebody. They have a journal where they wrote down everything that happened to them. And most importantly, they are willing to talk to you. And so I just kind of mentioned how we did all that stuff. But, we did a lot of calls and we did a checklist and all that good stuff. So this is actually, this is Carla Quezada. She is what is the main character in not the environmental justice story that we talked about, but in a story that I just did on wage theft. And Carla was the perfect character. She hit all of those boxes for us. She was someone who was accessible. She had a bunch of documents, and we were able to get more to kind of complement the things that she had given us and to verify a lot of things. She was willing to talk to us, and her story, which I can show you guys really quickly. The story was about federal contractors who get, taxpayer money for, federal contracts to serve, like food at, the Reagan building in DC or something like that, but they're cheating their workers. And so Carla was one of those workers. She'd worked at Subway for, I think, 11 years or something like that. And what happened is that she would work more than 40 hours, but when she got her check at the end of the week, she would get a check from 2 different companies. And so the hours would add up to more than 40 hours together, but because no single check was more than 40 hours, she wouldn't get overtime. And it was just, it's like she fit a lot of the boxes for us. And we were able to find her actually through a trade union that she had been working with, and she had done a lot of strikes or whatever. And so she was a great resource. And so really just finding people, and as we listen to Carla's story, I mean, it's a great story. Well, not a great story, but she just had a lot of things going on, and you just kind of understood and felt her pain, because she was trying so hard just to kind of stay afloat, and like she ended up having to move out of her house and like move into a room in somebody else's house. It was crazy. But anyway, that's the kind of thing you want to be hearing someone's story and then say, you know what, this is horrible. Like, I want someone else to know about this. On perfect characters. There are no perfect characters. Like, I mean, obviously there can be perfect for your story, but, nobody's perfect, and you have to remember that. Author Belle Wilkerson, who wrote The Warmth of the Other Suns, said this about the people that she focused on for her book, which is about the Great Migration. I wanted people who were beautifully imperfect. Perfection is not real, and readers cannot identify with people presented as perfect. So I looked for people who were beautifully imperfect and willing to acknowledge that, because this isn't the kind of work where you want to pin someone to a wall and say, isn't it true you're not perfect? I wanted to find people who were at peace with their mistakes and the things that they had done not particularly well. Acknowledging your character's flaws makes them human, and that's what's going to help your story to resonate. Okay, now the bad news. Bad news is that there are lots and lots and lots of, well, the good news is that there are lots and lots of people there out in the world that you can talk to for your stories. The bad news is that you may find the perfect character and they don't want to talk to you. So, why wouldn't people want to talk to you? Like, you're awesome, right? Sure. The problem is that the communities that we are covering are marginalized for a number of different reasons. It may be that there were other stories about the community or about this issue that they didn't appreciate the way that you portrayed their community, or they got mistreated or misquoted by another reporter that's not you, but they're going to take it out on you because you're the media. There's a general mistrust of outsiders generally in places that are not, media circles or, metropolitan areas. There could be a fear of retribution or retaliation, depending on the kind of story that you're working on. And then also you may end up having handlers who restrict access to the people that they give you, that they kind of put you in touch with. So Carla was great, but we had to always contact the union in order to get to Carla because, well, Carla spoke Spanish, and he was like, well, I just don't want to give you our number because, we had some people harassing her before, like other reporters just kind of, talking to her. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool and all, but I'm not going to harass her. We just have a couple of questions. And it became much harder just to kind of have to go through an intermediary every time, but it may be something that you have to do. You also have to just remember that you are an outsider. And a lot of the things that you're probably going to hear today are going to be very similar refrains, like remembering the fact that you were an outsider and you were coming in and you were trying to get access to someone else's community. All right, so these are just some of the barriers. Like there could be a lot of other barriers depending on the kind of story that you're doing, but this is just kind of a general list of things that could possibly happen. So how do you overcome those? First things first, you have to invest the time. Getting sources, getting people to talk, this is all about relationship. And you build a relationship by being there. So if you are covering a town or covering an issue in a particular community, be there, come to meetings, write smaller stories. As people see you and they recognize you, they recognize your work, they read the paper that morning, they saw your name, your byline, they'll start to trust you because they're seeing that not only are you here to cover the things that are important to them, you're here and you're listening even when you don't need to be, kind of in air quotes. Also, so building on smaller stories, share your humanity when you're meeting people. So I cover disparities in environmental impacts, and I am also from Flint, Michigan. My mother still lives in Flint, Michigan. So as I am in New York and I'm trying to build sources on the environmental justice beat, I talk to them about Flint. And that humanizes me. It brings me out of this, like, I'm a reporter and I am, this, authority on all of these things. And it's like, yeah, this is what I do. I'm also a person. And it just makes you, it makes them be able to connect with you a little bit more. And I'm not saying that you should make it up, but if you do have something that you can relate to them on, then do it, use that. Informed consent. So these communities are not the communities that you always see in the newspaper or on TV or what have you. So they may not be necessarily super media savvy. So you need to walk them through that process. You need to make sure that they understand what you're doing, what their interview is going to be used for, and that they agree to that. It's not just for their benefit, it's also for, and that's kind of where your character comes in. Like, you could come in, you could talk to someone and say, well, you said it on the record, so I'm gonna use it, but it's like, that doesn't serve your purpose. Like, it gets you a story, but it will shut you out of a community. I would shut you out of my community. Like, I wouldn't talk to someone who I'm just having a conversation with, and my candid thoughts end up in the newspaper. And with these communities, and when I say these communities, I'm not trying to be derogatory, but just kind of these communities that are not necessarily paid attention to as much, you kind of have to just make sure that they understand everything that goes along with talking to you, because there's a lot that they may not even recognize. So just make sure that you understand that and that you get their consent at all levels. They also may not understand, background and, off the record, and you can talk people through that. Listen to and address their concerns. So a lot of the things that are barriers to trust are the fact that people have never been listened to. So if they're, upset about how they were portrayed by some other reporter or whatever, then you can say, okay, you were concerned about your quotes. For like a longer story like mine, I might say, well, I'm happy to go over, the content of what we used from you. Or, and you could, that depends on your particular organization's rules. Maybe you guys have rules about what you do share and what you don't share. But because our organizations, the ones that I have worked for in the past, and here, they understand that this is a relationship, and one, it's a privilege, and people are letting you in. And so if you need to just kind of even generally summarize, just make sure no, I did not talk about how you called your boss a jerk and all these other things like that. I used this section. This is what I talked about. Just kind of ease their fears. Then that's probably okay. Also, no is okay. It's acceptable. This is their story. And just because you want to tell it doesn't mean that you get to tell it, or you get to tell that particular person's story. So you need to make sure that they maintain agency over their own stories. And people just might not want to talk to you. Maybe they won't talk to you today, but as you continue reporting on that community, they'll talk to you in 3 weeks, or in a month, or in 2 months, or maybe they never will, and that's fine. That needs to be okay. One paper that I think did this really well about kind of like building trust in the community is the New York Times. They did this story last, I think, December, that took people inside of Chicago gangs. And it's a really long story, but it's really well done, and it humanizes the people behind a statistic that we kind of just, write off. Like, we have a president who is kind of just saying, the horrible violence in Chicago. And it's like, well, no. There's a lot of things that are behind that. And he and John Elligo, who is the reporter on this story, he went inside and he spent, I don't know how long he spent, but he spent so much time that he was able to build enough trust with the people, the men involved in these gangs, that they did a Facebook Live with the New York Times talking about, gang violence and the issues that they were dealing with. And they're just sitting in this room, and I have a link to it, and I don't know what time it is, but if you have a chance, I would really suggest going and looking at it, because you can see in the conversations, it's like he's just one of the guys. And that came because he had been there. He'd been in the room. He just had been hanging out with them, talking about whatever, and they trusted him. Okay. When in doubt, be humble. It's a privilege to be invited into somebody's life and into their story, and they are doing you a favor. It's not the other way around. You're not owed anything, and you have to remember that for us, it's a story, but for them, it's their life. So you need to treat them with that respect and come to this with humility. Okay. All right, so you get in, you find the people, you find all these great people. How do you actually do this interview? So you want to actually figure out how to interview someone so that you get that great story that you've identified and that you can figure out, get all the details so that you can actually portray that and put that into your actual story. So, first things first, I like to empower my subject, the interview subject. And they may never use this, but especially in situations where it's a very sensitive topic, like maybe not, environmental justice, but people sometimes are talking about, deaths or some other injustice, some other thing that's just very hard to talk about. We're talking about things that are very intrusive, very personal. And so I just lay the groundwork and I say, hey, this is what we're gonna talk about. This is what I'm gonna talk to you about. We've probably already talked about this before off the record, but I'm gonna be recording this, or I'm gonna be taking notes, or I'm gonna be doing this. Here's what's gonna happen, so that they know at every step where we're going. And if it's a particularly hard subject, I'll say, if you need a minute, let me know. We can pause, we can stop, and that's fine. But they need to know that they have that control. And literally, all of my many years of reporting, I have never had someone actually take me up on the offer to stop talking. Because if you're talking to them, one, you gotta think they probably haven't been listened to, because otherwise you wouldn't be telling the story. And so they understand that, and if you've laid all this groundwork before, you've built all this trust, they know that you're here and you want to tell their story for a reason. And so even if it's hard, they may take a second, but they're like, all right, no, people need to hear this. And they kind of are on that journey with you. So, give them that power. I've never had anybody use it. Maybe they would, but I haven't had anybody use it. Plan to be there for a while. When I was in New Mexico reporting on environmental justice denied, I was literally driving around the entire state of New Mexico. Is very large. In case you didn't realize on the map, I was very, very surprised when I started driving. I would go to people's houses, and we had talked before, and they'd be so excited to meet me because, we had all these conversations about this thing that they were really, really interested in. And they would come in, and they'd like, okay, well, let me make you some tea, and here, let me show you these pictures, and let me do this. And so you just sit there, and you say, okay, I'm here. You're inviting me in. Let's be here. And I learned about their hobbies. I learned about this thing, and that also helps with your reporting. But it also helps them to get more comfortable with you being there to talk about this very real thing, not just as some disembodied voice on the phone, but as a real person who is looking them in the face about this thing. So settle in. Like, I spent, sometimes 2 hours just kind of not hanging out, but some time, hanging out and talking to them about other things. And then, maybe an hour and a half just on the interview. Beforehand, consider your questions and your blind spots. I made an exhaustive, detailed list of questions for every interview that I did for the main characters. And I ran it by people who had more experience about either reporting or some of the issues that I was talking about. So when we're talking about the same thing that the students did by kind of fact-checking it with the folks at the food lab. It's like, okay, am I asking the right question here? Is this a potential landmine that I'm walking into that I don't know? So just make sure that you aren't so proud of the fact that I'm a journalist and I found all these things that you step in it when you get to asking the question. So, and that's especially important when you're dealing with issues of maybe personal violence or something like that. You just never know what might be a trigger. In the interview, be exhaustive. just again, why you were settling in and being there for a while. You're gonna talk to them about everything. You wanna understand, you want them to tell you a story, basically. So it's like, okay, start at the beginning. What was your day like? Tell me when this thing happened. You know, you're interviewing them for stories, for scenes, for narrative threads. And to get that, you gotta have details. It can't just be the overarching thing that you can get from a document. You have to actually know that, you know, every day they started out, you know, eating oatmeal, but today they decided to do this thing, and that's what brought them to this, you know, diner, and that's where they ran into this thing. So you gotta know those things. And sometimes you don't even know what details are important until you hear them. And so that's why you, again, are there for a while, and you are listening for those things that pique your interest. A couple of other things, a lot of the stuff, sorry if it's remedial, is the stuff that you know. But it's the stuff that we don't always do because we can kind of take shortcuts. We can, you know, people will say, oh, you're from ProPublica, oh, you're from the New York Times, and here's my entire life story. And for these communities, you don't have that automatic trust. So you need to do all of the things that you were taught in journalism school or that you did at your first job that you're like, oh, I really have to like write out all my questions and I need to do this. It's not gonna just be easy. You have to actually think about these things and be considerate about what you're doing, how you're conducting yourself, and what you wanna get out of them, because one, you also don't wanna waste people's time. So anyway, so yeah, so a lot of this stuff is basic, but it's important. I've taken lately to saying in conversations when somebody says something that I'm interested in, oh, say more about that. And I think I got that from my friend at NPR, but just really be interested in the way that you ask conversations. You know, say more, like tell me what happened next. Like, you know, ask them, invite them to tell you a story. Also look for turning points in the interview when they're telling your story and you're like, whoa, that happened. Wait, if something makes you go, whoa, like dig into that. What happened? How did that feel? Like, so is this what happened? You said they called you here and then this happened. Get those details and figure out what was going on at the point when you are most interested. And if you can't find, ideally, the moment of conflict, then take note of where there might have been drama or suspense or some sort of emotion or healing. And if you can't figure out when the person felt it, when did you feel it? When you were hearing the story, and then drill down from there. I'm gonna just mention this. We went to Oxnard, California as a part of our reporting trip. And actually, I think I have a few minutes. I can tell you a section, I can give you a section of this. And I talked to this guy.
But all I know is that in my own family, if 80% of my aunts and uncles had some kind of health concern and they grew up where I grew up, it's a red flag. My name is Mario Quintana from the city of Oxnard. I grew up in La Colonia, and this is a historic neighborhood. It's really kind of where most migrant families start out. It's primarily Spanish speaking. You know, it's low cost, it's cheaper. You know, I can remember when pesticides were sprayed. To us, it was just like, wow, that's cool to see that come down. But, you know, now as an adult, I think that was actually pretty dangerous.
So I met Mario. He was actually like a city councilman, like a version of a city councilman there. And we were talking about, you know, the community. And he's like, well, no, I'm from here. And he told me this story about his family and about how they kind of, you know, that thing that you kind of hear where, you know, I kind of always figured something was wrong, but we just kind of thought that it was whatever. And I was like, well, no, tell me more about that. Like, so your family, like who in your family has cancer and what happened to this person? And, you know, your mom died, and they all died before they were like in their early 60s or something like that. And I was like, you know, and how did that feel? Like, what did you guys think? And we talked about that. Oh, that's not what I want to do. Okay. All right, so once you get people in, you got to keep their trust. In general, what you're doing is you're trying to, not take advantage of people. You want to, again, be very clear about the things that you're asking of them and the things that you are going to take from them, because what you are taking something from them. You are, using their story and putting it into another thing. And so you want to make sure that you're treating them respectfully and not taking advantage of the trust that they've placed in you. Before your story runs, after your story runs, 3 months after your story runs, be in contact with people. Continue to build those relationships. Check in with them. There were people, I left CPI last month. There were people who were calling me like 2 months ago, asking about where their EPA case was, like where things stood. And if I had any information, I would give it to them. I would say, they would just want to know like what was going on. And so I'd say, well, let me look up your case. And I'd figure out, because we built a database that was interactive. And I'd pull that up. Answer their emails. Like, these people have let you in a way that they have probably not let people in a long time, or in a very, very personal way. Don't discard them. All right, so bottom line, really quickly, and then we'll open up for like really quick questions. Do the work, be there, be a good person, listen. The golden rule plus, basically treat people as you would want to be treated, and then go like just 1 or 2 steps extra. The consequences of being featured in your story could have all these ramifications, and just make sure that they really, really, really understand that. And then check your privilege and share your humanity. This is a quote from Chips Quinn, who was the editor at the Poughkeepsie Journal. Care, care, care. Take it and show it. And that's just a general rule for journalism and life, period. So that's it. So we're gonna open up for really quick questions. I think we have like maybe just under 10 minutes. So let's go. Let's go.
The audio portion of your interview, did you conduct that? And how did that affect the way you conducted your interview, or what tricks did you employ to get that narrative so encapsulated?
So basically he's asking how I did that, because I'm not a broadcast reporter at all. Right. I'm print.
That's why I asked.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had a Tascam recorder, which is like this crossbody situation with the microphone and my headphones, and I had it on all day. I had it on as soon as I walked in, so that they saw it, they knew what was going on. I explained to them what I was doing. I'm saying, hey, I'm gonna record this. I'm gonna be really, really close to you in order to make sure that I have great audio. So I'm gonna be like here, and I need you to be okay with that. And so we just talked about random things for a little bit to get them okay. And then after a while, they kind of forget. And so you just start talking to them, and if you're sitting there and you're telling me a story, and I'm just like, really? What's going on with that? And how did this, what? Okay, and you're not caring about the fact that I have a microphone two inches from your face. You're just gonna talk to me because I'm interested in your story. And so you kind of have to just make sure that they see you as opposed to paying attention to all of the other things that you might be using. Other questions? Did I answer your question?
Do you ever fear that you're engaging in advocacy, or do you feel that you have to explain to others sort of what you are on the continuum between an advocate and an objective journalist?
Yes and no. I'll explain it because people ask, but journalists in general are there to kind of expose wrongs and to, do what they can to right them, like to hold the public accountable, hold the government accountable. So if my job happens to be that, and I'm happening to, focus on an issue that maybe other people have also picked up on, not my problem. Like, government shouldn't be doing that. They should be doing their job. So you're mad that I'm focusing on it? That's not my job. I don't care. But I will explain it. And there is a line And we talk about that in our newsroom. Well, I'm thinking of CPI because I haven't done any stories yet at ProPublica. But we talk about that and we say, okay, you know, do we want to rely so heavily on this person? Or let's have a conversation about our wording, our word choice, or what we call this, and you know, what the implications might be. So we have those conversations internally, but we know that at the end of the day, regardless of what people outside might think of us, that we know that we're sound and we are actually reporting on an injustice that the government has done in some way. And you can be mad at me, but that doesn't change the fact that this injustice exists. So, you know.
I guess to sort of follow up on his question, to speak a little bit to the editing process, since you are a print reporter, and you are, or I guess that's your background primarily, and you're in a recording process. You know, in the clip that you showed, the gentleman said, you know, my name is such and such, and I'm from such and such, as a way of introducing himself. Are you guiding him, and how much are you guiding him in that process? And then are you also telling him things like, you know, speak in full sentences. If I ask you a question, please don't answer yes, and you know, things like that. How much are you doing guiding along the way?
So that first part, I just said, you know, introduce yourself. Tell me who you are, so I have it on tape. And I told them beforehand, I said, okay, if it doesn't happen on tape, it doesn't happen. So wait until I give you the microphone to talk. And those were my only guidelines. In terms of making sure that I got good sentences out of them, I asked them better questions. That was it. It's like, don't ask a yes or no question. All right, tell me about this. You can't tell me yes or no from that. So, all right, I'll just fix that. I won't have to coach you because I'll just do that work on the front end to make sure that you don't have to do it. Other questions?
Have you done a lot of like long-term reporting projects, like where you followed people long-term? No? Okay. I was just wondering how you navigate, in general, sort of friendships that you develop with these sources. Like,
So I haven't done like anything where I'm following somebody over many years or anything like that, but I think in general, I guess this is me kind of doing an academic answer because I've not done this personally, but it's a relationship. As long as they understand that you're a reporter, they can talk to you and you can talk to them, and that's okay. I haven't had anyone, you know, kind of, you know, ask me about, or, you know, there are issues about, you know, people asking you for money or, you know, asking you for help, like actual assistance in some instances for certain stories. And I haven't had that. I also just try to remind people that, you know what, when they do call me asking for help about certain things, I'm like, you know what, hey, like, you know, I'm a reporter. Like, have you called, you know, this lawyer? Have you called, you know, this organization? Have you called these other people who are actually here to help? Like, I'm here to tell the story. If there's a way that I can tell more of the story, then great. But, you know, I can't write a lawsuit for you, or I can't do those things for you. And I think that it also, on the other hand, it also is okay sometimes to just not be somebody's friend, but if they just want to talk to you, okay, that's fine. It doesn't cost me anything to listen. If they divulge something that that I would want to report on, you mean? Then I would talk to them about that and say, hey, you know, you mentioned this thing. I know that you were kind of, you know, just talking, but is it cool if I look into that? Or, you know, again, at that point, if they're calling you just to talk, y'all are on pretty good terms. So, you know, you're probably good to say, they know that you're a reporter, they know that the things that you say, they say to you are kind of on the record, even if they're not. And, or at least, but again, that's where your character comes in and you say, you know what, is this something that might cause a problem for you? Or maybe they give you a seed of an idea and you go find somebody else to illustrate that idea. And so you can find a way to get around that, even if they're a tipster, essentially. And still respect that relationship and not put them in danger in any sort of way. Oh wait, there was one back here, yeah.
Yes, do you find body language important, and instead of like a phone call interview? And with your phone call interviews, what do you do to engage people over the phone where you can't express yourself?
I laugh a lot, and I just kind of act like a regular person. So I speak like this, and I'm like, you know, I'm just a regular person, so I just try to not be like, I am a reporter and this is the evening news and whatever. No, I'm not. I'm like, hey, I want to talk to you about this thing. I know that we are on the phone, like, talk to me about, so what happened? And, so didn't you say that the same way you talk to anybody? It is easier to do that in person, obviously, because one, I can look at you and I can smile and I can say, okay, and I can show you that I'm engaged as opposed to being this, disembodied voice. But on the phone, I end up using a lot more like affirmatives. Just like, yeah, okay, Tell me what happened. Okay, no, you're fine. Because people will often apologize. Like, oh, I'm going on. No, keep talking. I got all day. Keep coming. Like, so I just kind of reaffirm that I'm here to listen and that I want them to talk. And so I do that a lot. And so, did I answer your question? Okay, cool. Okay.
I know you touched on it earlier, but can you elaborate on how you got people to trust you in undergrad?
So you're not talking about like on campus, you're talking about other people, like when you go out to like internships and stuff like that. I would actually end up playing on my youth a lot. So I look young, period. Thank you. So I've looked young for a long time. And so I would just kind of, hate to say this, I don't know if this is good advice or not, but I would play on the fact that they probably thought that I was ignorant or that I didn't know things. And I'd say, oh, really? Well, can you tell me more about that? And why would you do that? And so can you explain that to me? Because I don't understand. And so they'd be like, oh, this young girl, she doesn't know anything. And they just would tell me stuff. And I'm like, yes, keep telling me things. And that was fine. I'm like, you can think what you want to think about me. But I'm just trying to get this information. And it was also really helpful in, also, one thing I did is real actual things that I can tell you. I would repeat things that people said to me. And so if they tell me something really complicated, I'd say, okay, so are you saying this? And kind of have them confirm it. So that they knew that, one, I understood it, and that's what I was there for, to make sure that I understood things. I also, what else did I do? One thing that I did when I was at I worked at the Providence Journal for several years, after I graduated. And when I came into the community, because people hated the Providence Journal in Rhode Island, and because it was after the station nightclub fire, and people just hated it, and they're just, whatever. And I came into this community where the station nightclub actually was, and so no one wanted to talk to me. So I met with everyone that I could, like all the officials, and I said, look, I don't know what your relationship was with the other reporter who covered West Warwick. I'm new. This is me. We can set the ground rules here. So if you have a problem with something I write, call me. We'll talk about it. If there's a correction, we'll fix it. If you're just upset, we can also talk about it. If you need to yell at me, feel free. We can talk about it, but this needs to be a dialogue. You don't get to shut me out. And especially for officials, like for people, it's different. But so I did that a lot, and I just made sure that they knew that they could always call me to talk about things, and whether or not they were happy or whether they were unhappy with something that I wrote, and I wouldn't just dismiss them. And I actually did, correct things, or I came to things. I was also there. I came to meetings, and I showed up and I wrote stories, and so those are two things that I did to kind of build trust, and then for when I had to, because I did a lot of breaking news as well, and so if you're covering like a car crash or somebody has died in some horrific way, that the paper actually has to cover it, because that's the only reason why you would cover somebody dying, essentially. I would come in and I would just say, look, I want to make sure that your story gets told, or that your loved one isn't remembered just for the way that they died, but that I can help to share how this person lived, and help people to understand who that person is. And they were usually like, oh, yes, come in, come talk to me. And then sometimes they didn't, and sometimes they slammed the door in my face, and I said, okay, that's cool, but I was still there, and I tried. So, did that answer your question? Okay, cool. Thank you guys so much. This is my email and Twitter in case you have other questions.